G'day guys and welcome back to another GDS video, this time for football. With the EPL season just around the corner, Ross and I, we're going to deep dive into all the key stats across all the positions to give you the good oil about what you need to be looking for with some of the players you select for your competitions when the season starts up very shortly. Before we begin, Roscoe, how are you, mate? We're in a very big tense moment right now because we're waiting on the GDS round updates to come in. But other than that, how are you?
Yeah, no, very good. Had a good weekend across game day squad footy, Supercoach. So waiting to see how we've gone. Hopefully, we've cracked the top 5 in something. That'd be really good. But I'm really keen to break down all these slides. There's so much data, so much information that we really hope will be useful for all of you watching, and hopefully can kick us off with a bang going into the new Premier League season as well. So very keen to get on with this one as well.
That's it. And when I was putting these slides together, I was thinking, how good will this data look not only for sort of the expert in EPL or Fantasy Premier League, but also for ones that are starting up near what expected goals means compared to actual goals, like who underperforms, who overperforms, and then sort of deep diving into key stats, which Game Day Squad EPL is specifically picked out. And that's what I'm really looking forward to getting into with you, Roscoe. Before we go further ahead, just to make sure, use our code ASSIST, ASSIST. When you sign up, if you haven't signed up yet for Game Day Squad, you can get yourself 3 9 common packs just for free, just like that. So you can really elevate your contender squad from day one. All right, mate. We should get right into it then. And I think what better place to start than just talking about some team stats. So we're not going to go straight into the players, but necessarily, but we're going to look into what teams sort of performed really well, what teams didn't perform so well, and sort of break down what some of these sort of data means. So right off the bat there, mate, your mob, Liverpool, top of the table. Now, we all know that, but can you
Yes.
talk us through what XG and XGA means and why that is important for consideration in terms of picking players from Liverpool or any of the teams for that instance?
So essentially, what it means, we've got the goal difference actual column, goals for and goals against, just on the left there. So we scored 86 goals across the 2024-25 campaign, whereas statistically, based on the difficulty of the shots, the player taking it, we should have only scored 82.2, which is a difference of about 3.8, which is not too bad, actually. It means that even if we'd scored 82 goals, we're not that far off what we actually scored. It wasn't fluky that we, you know, banged in a lot of goals. There was good data-driven basis for it. We can see bottom teams, for example, it sort of runs the other way. If we look at, Southampton in 20th, they had an expected goals of 32.7, but they only scored 26. Now, that just probably comes down to the quality of the players that they had, playing in games where they were maybe down 3 or 4-0 and they just start having a ping at goals, all that sort of thing. But yeah, expected goals is definitely very useful for fantasy, as it sort of helps us work out whether a player is taking good opportunities to sort of get involved in scoring. You can see a player has 5 shots, but then if none of them are on target, they all go well over the bar into Rosette, as they'd say. Not really good. Whereas if you can see a player hasn't had any goals, they've had 4 shots, but it should be an expected goals of 2, either means they got really unlucky, or you need to be watching that they're not a complete butcher and they're just not finishing off their work. So it's a very important consideration to make for sure.
And one thing that I can really take out of is if Liverpool, like you mentioned, expect to score a lot of goals, and you did score a lot of goals. But let's have a look at Arsenal in second there. So in terms of conceding goals, they conceded 34 and the expected goals conceded was 34. But in terms of the goals scored, they scored 69, but their expected goals was 59.9. And so they scored 10 more goals than expected across the campaign. Now with Gyökeres coming in as well, will that number even go up a bit higher now that they have a proper striker there as well? Is something that we're going to need to consider, and how that's sort of the fact that they're taking quality shots and they're making quality shots. That really makes those Arsenal assets quite valuable. But we'll talk a lot more about that in more detail. So this is sort of like the basic team stats. Let's look a little bit more advanced now in terms of home and away stats. So if you played any other competition, you would know that a lot of teams, especially role players of certain teams, perform better at home, especially against inferior opposition. But now when we look at home versus away stats for the EPL, Ross, do you feel like there's still that same correlation between teams performing better at home in front of their home crowd and sort of like you see more clean sheets at home? What do you sort of take out of home versus away stats?
Yeah, look, as you say, I think, playing players that play at home against weak opposition is usually a good recipe for them to score quite well. But I also don't mind, obviously, say if you're playing a relegation-based team, to play them away as well. Like normally, if a team's bad, they're bad. If you're playing Manchester City at home and you're Crystal Palace, you're going to struggle slightly less than you would struggle away. Like either way, it's going to be a difficult game. So I think there is a definite weight towards picking good players at home against weaker opposition. But in terms of being away from home, I don't know if it's that much of a disadvantage. I know Nottingham Forest there managed to get 33 points away from home. And that could be a matter of they aimed to go in and scrape results, which is often a tactic that some of these mid-table teams, your Newcastles, your Villas, your Forests, can be dangerous for, even though they're playing at home against Manchester City. You think, oh, I'll take Erling Haaland as my striker, or I'll take Gvardiol in defence, for example. Then, Nottingham scrape a goal and play for a 1-1 draw. It can harm clean sheets. It can harm your offensive output as well. So,
yeah. And that's great that you bring that up. I just want to bring your attention sort of two teams there in terms of Manchester City, in terms of their home versus away. So at home, 43 goals scored, 23 goals conceded, compared to 29 goals scored away and 21 goals conceded. So the goals conceded is roughly the same, but 14 extra goals in the same amount of matches when playing at home. And then you have a look at Newcastle, who finished 5th on the table. 40 goals at home, 20 goals conceded. But on the road, they scored 28 and conceded 27. So you're going at a 2-1 split at home compared to a 1-1 split, basically, on the road. So when we look at this sort of data, now for Newcastle with Alexander Isak most likely going to you guys at Liverpool, Ross, perhaps this data will shift, but it's just good to know what sort of mentality some teams have when playing at home compared to away, and whether this data sort of translate from one year to the next. Is there anything else that you want to bring up in terms of teams that we're just looking at this table right now that you expect to see sort of increase from where they are going up? I really hope that one team that I'm quite fond of goes up from a measly 15th, Manchester United. No European football, so we'll just have FA Cup and the league to focus on. New signings of Mbeumo and Cunha as well. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that this is not where we finish this year. Is there any other teams that you can see either rising or falling, mate?
Well, I think an interesting one could be Everton. Everton are normally quite steady at home. I know the stats are not the most favourable for them. They scored equally amount of points home and away. Now, the reason I say this, though, they're usually a pretty well defensively set team, and they're playing out of a new home stadium, which, from the looks of how it's been built, I know Goodison Park is an iconic stadium, but it seems to be built so steeply in the stands. It seems like the fans are over the pitch. It's got a bigger capacity. I think if they can adjust to playing there, make it a real fortress, it could become troublesome for teams that go and play as the away team there to crack through and do really well, which I wouldn't necessarily mean that we should be picking Everton players every week, because I don't think they'll be the strongest, but they're probably one that I think can improve on their performance at home.
Nah, love that insight sort of there, mate, especially in sort of something as simple but yet overlooked as something like a new stadium. And that will really make players like Jordan Pickford, who are already good picks, even better picks this year. Let's get into the positions then. So what this video will look like, we've gone through the team stats. Now we're going to break up the positions into goalkeeper, defender, midfielders, and forwards. And we're going to take you guys through the key stats from a GDS perspective, what GDS is specifically looking for, and who sort of the best performers in each of the major categories by each position were in the 2024-25 season. So when we look at the key EPL goalkeeper stats, mate, some of the big ones that stand out. So really, we're not really thinking that goalkeepers are a reliable source of goals and assists. But what they are a reliable source of, or can be, are clean sheets. So if you're a goalkeeper and you're in a team and you've maintained a clean sheet, most likely over the game, because goalkeepers don't get subbed out, you get +8 points. And that's the major source of points for goalkeepers. The other big one would be penalty saved. And that's something that's a little bit intangible with +10. Like that's That's huge from that regard. Now, obviously, the cost of it is if you concede the goal, which most likely happens in a penalty, you go -2. So really you're looking for teams that have strong defenses, and that's what we're going to look at coming forward. And then you've got the save numbers as well. So what we're really looking at here, mate, is you don't necessarily want someone like a David Raya might not be for Arsenal a better asset than a Jordan Pickford, who has a good save ratio and he has a good number of saves per game compared to Raya, who may not see many shots on goal anyway. But what we'll do now is, Ross, do you want to take us through sort of the highest averaging goalkeepers from last year? Thank you to GDS for supplying this data. And sort of tell me what sort of pops out to you in terms of the players that played a majority of their team games.
Well, I think the first thing we can see here, we've got a lot of reserve keepers who've come in for a game and played quite well. Yaros, Bentley, Neto, Dubravka, Steele, Travers. Flecken up there with 37. He was quite a strong scorer in the fantasy formats last year, but he's transferred away from Brentford now. Their new number one goalkeeper will be Callagher, who's in this list as well, down the bottom there with 10. So he could be definitely one that we'll be watching out for if Brentford show signs of being pretty defensively stable. And even if not, as you mentioned, his save points could be something that we could greatly capitalise on. Some of the better options there again, we've got Pickford here with an average of 9.78. Sells from Nottingham Forest, 9.61. Sanchez from Chelsea is an interesting one at 9.55. I think Chelsea will be quite strong this season. But I'm not 100% sure if Sanchez is on the outer. I think he is. I believe they prefer Philip Jorgensen over him. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think Philip Jorgensen is currently their preferred number one. Now we have David Raya as well down the bottom there, 8.43, and Alisson from Liverpool, who are a bit below. I mean, it's a point per game. It's not a significant difference, but it can go to show that the clean sheets are not always the way to go. You get a keeper that makes 6 saves in a game, but they don't keep a clean sheet versus a keeper that makes 1 save with a clean sheet. You're still up overall. So it can be a tough one to weigh up for sure.
Yeah, and that's great points that you raised there in terms of sort of forecasting who may be in a team that has like a strong defense, but also defense that may be leaky to certain shots on goals, maybe from poor targets as opposed to like goal attempts that have a really high expected goals, for instance. So that's really interesting. And I can see why a lot of coaches are really eyeing off sort of your Jordan Pickford, your Matt Sells as keepers that they want to invest into to start off the year straight away. Let's have a look at some of the clean sheet stats. And so in terms of the top sort of clean sheet stats there, Ederson for Manchester City at 38.5%, David Raya for Arsenal at 34.2%. Matt Sells for Nottingham Forest had a 34.2% clean sheet percentage, but now he's at Brentford, if I'm not mistaken.
Matt Sells?
Yes. Is he still at Nottingham?
No, still at Forest. No.
Oh, sorry.
No, still at Forest, yeah.
New for Brentford keeper?
Callagher,
that's the one. Sorry, mate.
Yeah.
Alisson at 32.1%, and Jordan Pickford to round that out at 31.6%. So nothing really surprising there. Nottingham Forest having the third highest clean sheet percentage. They performed really well last year, and so Matt Sell should keep continuing with that, you would think. Is there anything that stands out to you there in terms of any of those players listed?
No, look, I think it is interesting to note that Flecken there only had 7 clean sheets for the year and he was down the bottom, and yet he outscored all the other keepers. So it could be a matter of finding that keeper who has the balance of getting a clean sheet occasionally, but really being active with the ball. A lot of these mid-table sides, Pope, Onana, Kepa, Jose Sa, Martinez, the teams are solid enough. They can deliver a clean sheet occasionally, but their work in terms of saves, getting these other stats in, clearances, punches, all that sort of stuff might be a little bit below the top liners as well.
Yeah. And talking about Mark Flecken, this is the reason why he performed so well in GDS last year. So he had 30 more saves than the second leading goalkeeper in Aaron Ramsdale. So Mark Flecken obviously not holding as many clean sheets, but a lot more saves there with a save percentage of 73.4% as well. That's really strong. But then you look at Matt Sells in third. So maybe someone like a Matt Sells is the perfect balance between holding clean sheets and also saves, similar with Jordan Pickford. But what you will see is when you go down the list, you're looking at David Raya at 14, Edison at 20, Allison at 16. These are keepers that just, because their defenses are so strong, just don't see many shots on goal anyway. And so that's where we really need to toss up what is the benefit of chasing that basically automatic clean sheet compared to chasing some save points at the same time. Is there anything else that you want to add, mate?
No, look, I think we're about finding that balance. And very fortunately, as we're about to see on the next slide here, a big shout out to the guys at the Game Day Society. They're jumping in, really getting behind the content for GDS football for this season. I'm very much looking forward to watching their weekly sort of preview videos and their weekly shows. Should be very informational for us all. But yeah, these rankings here are a pretty decent summary of where we think that they could fit in. You know, I think Pickford and Sells might be the two who most teams might start with, but then obviously Becker and David Raya, being in strong sides, should get a decent amount of clean sheets. Edison, Martinez, Pope, Dean Henderson, they're interesting. You know, I think maybe you get ideal matchups with them. You know, I'm not sure how good Sunderland, Leeds and Burnley are going to be this season coming straight up from the championship. But, you know, say they're not really posing much of an offensive threat, you know, playing these guys in the ballers category and even somewhat to the uniques category could be an advantage as well. Is there anyone here that you're sort of interested to see who might not be so far up the top end?
Well, someone like a Kelleher, I don't know, is there a reason why sort of Flecken, now that he's left, just had such a high save percentage? Like, is it something to do with Brentford there? And now Kelleher coming over from Liverpool, he would have spent a lot of time on the bench there. Now he gets the opportunity. Perhaps he could be a point of difference if he can replicate what Flecken was doing. But I think in GDS, the goalkeeper position is probably not a position where you want to toy around with too much if you can find sort of the right balance between that save percentage and the clean sheet percentage.
100%. But that's the thing about it. You know, we do get a week by week basis. Say in the first week, you don't pick the most ideal keeper. You know, we can watch the first 4 or 5 weeks, see who's starting, see who's performing really well. But even then, we can't necessarily trust all the data entirely because some teams might start off with, you know, 2 relegation sides in the first 3 weeks, whereas, you know, someone might start off with Liverpool, Arsenal, and Newcastle in the first 3 weeks. Good luck making any judgments about their keeper. Yeah. So I guess it's a bit of an eye test as well, but the data can be really, really good to drive us a long way.
No, totally, mate. Well, I reckon we move on to the defenders then.
100%.
Okay, so now when we think about the defenders, I guess the main things we want to talk about is what stats can they get. Now, goalkeepers, we didn't talk about sort of goals scored, assists too much, but as we all know, who doesn't love an attacking defender? So if you're a defender and you score a goal, you get 10 points. If you get an assist, you get 7 points. So Ross, I think straight off the bat, we're looking at those fullbacks that can either go up the field a little bit, like in the Trent Alexander-Arnold sort of mold. No longer in the PL, but I know there's a couple of players that have switched teams that will take on some of that responsibility. And then the assists, we're really looking at the corner takers, sometimes the free kick takers. That's where it's at. Plus, you get the clean sheet points. So you get 6 points for a clean sheet held as a defender, which I think is huge in terms of sort of elevating fullbacks from solid teams. But then equally, you get the key pass points, +2, interceptions +1, successful dribbles +1, penalty committed -4, fouls drawn 1, and then aerial duels 1 is a big one at +1 as well. So what we're thinking there's like Van Dijk that are really strong in the air. In terms of the players, now looking at those stats, mate, who are some of the players that come straight to your mind in terms of should be dominating Game Day squad this year?
Yeah, look, I'll give a big shout out to my mate Josh, aka Salty. His term that he's invented for some of these defenders is the false 3, similar to the false 9, but it's right backs and left backs that don't necessarily play there much. I'm looking at Rayan Aït-Nouri at Manchester City. I've been very big on him all preseason. His attacking output was amazing last season. Now he gets to a club where hopefully there should be a bit more defensive stability than Wolves. I think he's one that can go really well. Daniel Munoz from Crystal Palace, I think one playing as a wing back. He likes to get forward, get assists, and playing 5 back, they can often be not too bad at keeping clean sheets either. And then I think maybe a third one, probably be James Tarkowski, Everton. I think similar to the sort of Pickford mold, he's an offensive threat from set pieces. He likes to score a lot of headers from corners. Pretty good interceptor of the ball. Doesn't really get dispossessed often. And Everton, being that defensive-minded team, sometimes their games can just be 1-0 and they'll get the clean sheet points there as well. So I think with the rewards for, successful tackles, interceptions, that sort of thing, I think that will really benefit Tarkowski as well, as one who plays in a really defensively minded team.
Yeah.
May not be as good offensively as these sort of wingback false 3 types. But, being stable, snagging a couple goals from corners across the season could be really beneficial.
Yeah, no, love that, mate. Well, let's dive straight into some of the top defenders from last year and some familiar names there. So Daniel Munoz, they're at 11.4. We won't talk about Trent Alexander-Arnold too much, given that he's now moved to Real Madrid. Anthony Robinson for Fulham at 10.99. Pedro Porro. So straight away there, mate. Tottenham. Now the clean sheet percentage is really low in terms of Vicario had, I think it was the 18th. So the Tottenham goalkeeper, the 18th highest clean sheet percentage. But Pedro Porro was a top 5 GDS defender last year, simply because of his ability to get those corners and get those assist points, plus any sort of other attacking outputs as well. Another player you mentioned then, James Tarkowski, Josko Guardiol. So Manchester City's sort of linchpin there. Do you see sort of Guardiol and Rayan Nuri being like the 2 sort of fullbacks for Manchester City?
Well, we never really know what Pep Guardiola is going to do. The Pep roulette has been something that's been around for a long time. I think I can see him playing a bit more centrally this season, but if he does end up playing out wide, then, definitely he's one that we do need to watch out for. Although I think regardless, clean sheet points should still be something that, Manchester City should thrive on. So against easy matchups, I think I'd be comfortable probably to pick the both of them, assuming that they're nailed, although he did play 37 games in the last season. So I would assume he's pretty nailed on.
Yeah. Let's have a look also at someone like Gabriel. Now, I know Gabriel had been in and out of the Arsenal side a couple of years ago at the start of the year, but has been locked on quite recently. You project him as one of the top scoring GDS defenders this year, Ross?
Yeah, look, I think Arsenal's defense should only be stronger. They've bolstered their midfield. They've signed Zubimendi. Declan Rice has been a wall for them. I think they've also had a couple of other sort of attacking signings as well. Victor Gyökeres, all that sort of thing that have bolstered their squad overall. I expect them to perform better than they did last season, which is strange, even though they came second. I do think they are a genuine chance to win the league. And I think Gabriel could be a big part of that. He's in the similar mold to Tarkowski, very big threat from corners. He pops his head up all the time.
And whilst he's not in the player pool as of yet, Nikola Milenkovic for Nottingham Forest was one of the strongest sort of defensive assets last year. I know is a highly sought after card. And if Forest are to continue growing this year, I can see Milenkovic becoming even more desirable as an EPL GDS asset as well. So those are just some of the key names there. We're going to move forward now to look at some of the attacking stats. And straight off the bat there, you can see why Milenkovic was so desirable last year, scoring an equal high for defenders in terms of goals of 5, along with Marc Cucurella for Chelsea and Josko Guardiol for Manchester City. Daniel Munoz had 4. And then you see Rayan Nuri there at 4 as well. So that straight away shows exactly what you're talking about, Ross, in terms of the attacking output. Now we need to hope that in a stronger side like Manchester City, that same role holds up. Because if it does, he could just be the best defensive asset we have in GDS football this year.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Cool. I think something that we also need to watch out for is Frimpong and Kerkez. I think they're ones that could be up there in that new role at Liverpool. But anyway, going on to the assists.
Go on.
Anthony Robinson. 10 assists is huge for a defender. Now, that's +7. So that's 70 points. That's better than a clean sheet just for him getting an assist. He loves to get forward, cross the ball in. I believe he's a set-piece taker as well for Fulham. So he's definitely one there. Aitnyari, Munoz, Kirkes, 5 assists at Bournemouth. Will that increase as he comes over to Liverpool? Remains to be seen. And then the rest of these guys are all sort of your fullbacks as well. Wan-Bissaka, Mitchell, Luca Digne, Lewis Hall, Semedo. I wouldn't really be too stressed about anyone below that, I don't think.
Wan-Bissaka, an interesting one. So sort of West Ham he's played really well at West Ham since he's moved over from Manchester United. I think he's just going to grow this year as well and push that top 5 defensive asset list, in my opinion. But I think you've just nailed everything, sort of, Ross, in terms of the players that can sort of get goals are really good. But I almost feel like assist is a little bit more predictable than goals. You can get a headed goal. You can get a goal where you sort of get on the counter in one way. But if you're on corners, you're exponentially more likely to get an assist than someone that isn't on corners. So I feel like if you can target defenders that are corner takers, that is one really good way that you can get a really desirable asset in GDS football. Do you agree on that?
Yeah, 100%. The set-piece takers are always so valuable.
Yeah. And in conjunction with that, when we look at shots on goal, this probably comes back to defenders that are free kick takers. So just like we said with corner takers, if you're a free kick taker for your team, you're exponentially more likely to score a goal as a defender compared to, for instance, a player that pops up at corners and is the main sort of source of a headed goal, for instance. And so the big names we're looking at, there's Guardiola, Shah, Porro, Munoz, Aitnyari. They're very these names keep popping up. And that probably gives us a good indication that they're going to be strong assets again this year, given that they hold the same role. What about passing/crosses? So this was somewhat interesting to me, but Virgil van Dijk had the most successful crosses amongst defenders. Do you have any sort of inkling as to why that may be?
I don't really know. I think sometimes he can be that sort of outlet at the edge of the box, maybe in a sort of free kick situation, or maybe he comes from the wall, the rebound comes in, and he just pops a little dinky ball over. I'm not 100% sure why that is. And the rest of these names at the top here, other than Porro, are all a bit strange to me as well. You've got Gomez, Jacob Greaves for Ipswich, who've gone down, Tyrone Mings, Dan Burn. I haven't really pictured these guys as big crosses of the ball. But it is +2 for a successful cross, and it is +2 for a key pass as well. So get a couple of these in a game, you're looking at +4 straight away on top of everything else. So could be one to watch out for. And I'm sure there'll be some very astute people playing the game who'll keep their eye on who's crossing the ball.
That's it, mate. Let's have a look at interceptions. So now this is another source of points that we talk about. So for every interception, you get +1. And so combining sort of the attacking nous of Aaron Wan-Bissaka in terms of the assist, he led the league. He led all defenders for interceptions last year. And that is really, really solid. So straight, I feel like the stocks of Aaron Wan-Bissaka is rising by each passing sort of year, and this year is going to go even to another level. Ruben Diaz from Manchester City, once again, though, only 27 appearances. So the question regarding whether he's locked, that sort of thing, that becomes tough, and you're going to have to play a bit of pep roulette from that regard. In terms of the other players, nothing really stands out. Like Virgil van Dijk is up there. Pedro Porro is up there again, but not really up near the top. So apart from Wan-Bissaka, is there anything that you really take out of this one?
No, look, I'm noticing Tyrone Mings there. He only had 14 appearances and he got to 42, which is pretty solid.
Big.
So if we take that and we take the successful crosses there across 14 appearances, his stats are actually looking not too bad.
And so what you're saying is if he's playing, he could be an option.
Yeah, I'll just have a quick look for us. I mean, he's still at Aston Villa. I'm not sure if he's got an injury at the moment, but it could be one to watch if he ends up playing in the first week.
For sure. Well, let's have a look then at some of the poorer stuff. So it can't all be roses. So we're going to look at fouls committed now. And up the top there, João Gomez, not too relevant, but Daniel Munoz. So a player that you were mentioning, Ross, as I think he was the second on average for defenders in GDS, but he had 56 fouls committed
Yeah.
across 37 games, and fouls committed a -1. So we don't want too many fouls being committed by our players, especially if they can lead to yellow cards or even red cards in some instances. We can see that Mark Cucurella is up there as well as his Chelsea teammate Levi Colwill. In terms of fouls committed, mate, do you think there's any tendency for more or less fouls now in the new EPL with like VAR and all of that sort of thing?
Look, I think there's always going to be fouls, but I think the standard of the refereeing was something that definitely came under a bit of scrutiny. So I would expect a bit more of a positive regression back to the mean of referees trying to take control of games. Whether that means they're a bit more strict in handing out cards and that leads to less fouls, or whether that means that they're willing to pay foul, and make sure that the players know that they're not going to stand for anything. I'm not really sure which way that's going to work out, but I would expect the average numbers here probably to be pretty similar, although I probably wouldn't be backing João Gomez if we had him in game day squad for sure. 70 fouls. He's probably up there for the cards, but I know that you've got this information as well, don't you?
It's coming. But one thing I'm also noticing is there's no Liverpool or Arsenal players, apart from William Saliba down the bottom there, that have made this list. So perhaps being in a better team may mean that you are less likely to commit more fouls. But let's look at some of these red and yellow card numbers. So the yellow cards on the left, red cards on the right. In terms of the red cards, I mean, we'll jump to that very quickly, but it's pretty rare. Like if it does happen, it'd be happening pretty sporadically. But in terms of the yellow cards, there are some, let's say, culprits off the yellow cards. And our boy Daniel Munoz again, tied for second with 10 yellow cards. But that just goes to show, mate, that he's an absolute weapon. If he's getting yellow cards and still the second leading scorer by average, he must be doing something right.
Yeah. Just an aggressive game style, bomb forward. Maybe that could be a factor. He goes forward and, perhaps turns the ball over, gets dispossessed and all that. And then he sort of has to work back to sort of not give up, a big advantage down that sort of left-hand side of the pitch. He just sticks a foot out, takes one for the team, and that's that,
That's it, mate.
I think it's a plausible theory.
It is for sure a plausible theory. And I guess this is where playing like a Munoz, and this is why I love GDS, in the fact that you could have Daniel Munoz, and in FPL, if your player gets, I think, Roscoe, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 yellow cards by the midway of the season, you miss a game. And so what ends up happening is if you've got him in FPL, you can't play him, but it doesn't matter in GDS. If he's missing a game, I don't really care. I'll just substitute whoever else I want in for the next game week, and then Munoz can come back in as well. So that's a really good benefit there of playing GDS, if you didn't really think from that perspective.
And I think another thing as well, which is good, if we compare this to FPL, a yellow card for a defender in FPL usually would mean no bonus points. They can't really finish in there because it takes a lot of that sort of bonus points off. Whereas for this, if they get a yellow card, you lose your -1, but they're scoring based on their output statistically on the pitch, not based on some sort of mystery bonus point system here, which can be scrapped by a yellow card. So even though he had 10, if he goes less than that and he's still the second averaging player, like his average could probably improve. I don't think it's too much cause to worry about.
Now, the very last thing that we're going to go through with defenders is own goals. Now, Ross, I know you've looked at the slides, but I'm not sure if you remember, off the top of your head, without looking, who do you think led all defenders amongst own goals last year?
No, I do remember this one. Mark Gay, I'm pretty sure he actually conceded one against Liverpool during the season. I don't know how you concede 3 own goals in a season, but it's quite impressive.
It is very impressive to concede 3 own goals in a season. But let's have a look at Craig Dawson. They only played 15 games, and he also conceded 2 there. Dan Burn. Yeah. Now, I've got a silver Dan Burn, and looking at these stats with the yellow cards, the own goals, he's not a desirable asset from last year. But that's why every new season brings new opportunities. But amongst the own goals, there's not too many sort of relevant players. Aaron Wan-Bissaka there had 1, but amongst the rest of them, Ruben Diaz had 1. Destiny Udogie for Tottenham, one of those sort of, inverted threes, false threes that you were mentioning. For Tottenham could also be quite handy. But across the board, not too much else that is of too much relevance. I guess now, mate, let's combine sort of the likelihood of clean sheets, of playing 60 minutes and getting your clean sheet points, the attacking returns, the interceptions, and not being too likely to get a red card or yellow card because you commit less fouls. This is what Game Day Society thinks. Let's see how we rate our players based off of this. So do you agree across the board with what they have in terms of their tier ranks?
Yeah, look, I think the top tier is probably pretty spot on. A lot of these attacking defenders who, as we've seen through the numbers, assists, shots on target, goals, all that sort of thing. These guys have got the role and they're there to play for it. I think some of these guys in the ballers category could possibly be up. I think Tarkovsky we could find that he could be up. Josko Vardiol could be up. Even some of the uniques, like Gabriel, Cucurella for Chelsea, perhaps even some Manchester United. I don't know if Mazraoui, if they improve defensively, like a Mazraoui could be one that's really, really handy for Manchester United. So I think the top tier there, the superstars, is pretty spot on. The ballers, again, these guys that would be looking to capitalize on favourable fixtures. Ilya Zabani, I believe he's just finalised the transfer this morning. So I think he's leaving Bournemouth, which could make them a little bit less stable defensively. They've already lost Kirkez as well.
They've lost a couple of players, haven't they? Yeah.
Yeah. And then, some of these uniques, could probably be bumped up to the ballers category, and they're definitely still playable as well. And the rising stars, I mean, we've got to watch out for some of these guys. They're quite young, Rico Lewis, Manchester City, Destiny Udogie, Spurs, all these kind of guys.
Yeah. And don't forget, my boy Lenny Yoro, I reckon he's going to come good this year with, like you mentioned, in terms of sort of those defenders, like Manchester United improving. Yoro should be a big part of that as well. Now, I want to get your quick thoughts as a Liverpool fan. If you haven't seen anything in terms of, like, if you're projecting now at the end of the season, where would Jeremy Frimpong rank amongst these categories?
I think Jeremy Frimpong would probably be in between ballers and superstars. I think defensively, we should be quite sound, which should lead to him getting a reasonable amount of clean sheets. But then I think he's going to have free reign to play really offensively on the right-hand side. And I think with Trent going, there is Connor Bradley there, but I think Connor Bradley will probably play understudy. Whereas I think with Kirkez, even though he's in that superstars column, Andy Robertson is a much better backup. And they also have Tsimikas as well. So, I think it could even be a matter of Tsimikas becomes the Cups player, and Robertson and Kirkez are sort of rotating through in the league.
Yeah.
So I think Frimpong could be up there in that sort of ballers, maybe bottom tier superstars.
Yeah. Mate, what a deep dive we've done on defenders. It's only going to get better from here, because now we're going to talk about the midfielders. Do you want to take us through sort of what the key stats are for the midfielders and why the midfielders may be a bit more reliable than forwards on a given day?
Yeah, look, there's just so much going on with midfielders in a way that I think it's actually quite balanced, that defensively minded midfielders and these sort of attacking midfielders who are essentially strikers or wingers can score really, really well. Goals scored and assists again, +9, +6. Then you're getting 2 points for key passes, shots on target, 1 point for successful dribbles, drawing fouls, accurate crosses. But then you're also getting those defensive stats. You've got interceptions +1, successful tackles +1, drawing fouls, that kind of thing. Playing 60 minutes is +2. So these sort of defensive-minded midfielders are less likely to be subbed off than your live wires. I'm thinking of players at Crystal Palace, your Ebery Eze's. They kind of can come on late and provide a spark. Mateta, I know he's a forward. But these kind of guys get subbed off. You very rarely would see Arsenal sub off Declan Rice within 50 minutes,
Rodri.
So there is a wide range of ways that you can score as a midfielder. And I think it'll be a good sort of test over the first few weeks to see whether some, defensively minded players, like your Zubimendi's, your Rice, maybe your McAllisters as well, are more beneficial to play than your Sakas and all those Foden kind of players.
Yeah. So what you're almost saying in a way there, mate, is comparing like an Eze where you know what he's going to give on the attacking side of things. He's listed as a midfielder, even like a Cole Palmer for that instance. You know what you can get attackingly. You're potentially saying that like a Declan Rice may be a more desirable asset potentially because he has all those defensive stats that are sort of propping his floor up a little bit. So he's not relying on the assists and goals, and any assists or goals that he does get is just an added bonus at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. You know, if Arsenal's playing at home against one of these relegation sides and they're
Yeah.
just unable to get through the defense, they're just playing the ball to him, right? He's intercepting it or he's making a successful tackle. He's hitting a key pass. He's just getting points left, right.
Yeah. And that's really interesting take there that you give, because since we don't really have a bonus point system in GDS football, these key stats are going to really add up at the end of the day. And like if you can sort of draw fouls in the midfield as a general, that's really strong there. So I'm looking at that, and then I'm looking at this data. And when I'm looking through it, I'm seeing a lot of attacking midfielders, mate. So what do you make out of this in terms of Palmer into like leading by average 16.1, Bruno Fernandes at 14.6, Eze at 13, and then it becomes a bit more clustered. So those top three are sort of in like a bracket of themselves. We'll have a couple of newcomers that we'll have to talk about as well. Is there any sort of players that you look through there and you see a certain way that they can improve on their output from last year?
Look, I think to start off with the top three that you've mentioned there, I think there's a clear role between the three of them that they all share. They're all kind of the offensive guy in their team. You know, I know Chelsea's got like Jackson and whoever else. Manchester United's got Hoyland and Garnacho and all that sort of
No
thing.
dodge.
You know, Mateta at Crystal Palace. But these three sort of run the show. Like they're passing, they're dribbling, they take set pieces. Palmer, Bruno, Eze, they all take penalties. Like they sort of run the show, you know.
Yeah.
Where I think then after that, not necessarily strong, it's wide as well. And down to sort of Kudus and Sarr, they're a bit lower, you know. And in the middle, we've sort of got more of your defensively minded players. We've got Enzo, we've got Tielemans, Declan Rice, Bruno Guimaraes, McAllister. So there is definitely a big mix there. And these are only averages. So I would expect the top guys, as the guys in their team, the focal point, to go really well again. But then these sort of lower to middle average sort of defensively minded players in these weaker matchups, I think, are ones that we should be considering playing.
Yeah. Now, I want to give something that I'm sort of thinking about is with Heung-min Son leaving Tottenham, does that open the door for James Maddison or Mohamed Kudus, the new son at Tottenham, to really take it to the next level and elevate up into that sort of top three category that we can see with Palmer, Fernandes, and Eze? Like that role that's left by Son, and knows in and out a little bit, but he was still the captain. No European football. Actually, no, sorry. They've got Champions League because they won the Europa League, but even then, someone's got to take the real mantle, right? You've got Solanke, but Maddison as the free kick taker, probably or possibly on penalties as well. Like, could he become a really nice asset that we could sort of become a set and forget as the season goes on?
Yeah, look, I think that sort of depends on how Thomas Frank sort of sets up Tottenham's side.
Yep.
I know towards the end of Ange's tenure, Son was kind of rotating off the bench a little bit. But, you know, if Maddison's fit, that's the main thing for him, keeping fit. He should start probably in the centre most games. I would expect Kudus to probably play on the right. Or maybe on the left, Brennan Johnson plays on the right with Solanke up top. So there is definite scope there if they improve on their 17th or whatever finish it was last season, that, you know, they should score some more goals as well.
Exactly, mate. All right, let's look into some of these stats then. So goals is the big one. Now, very quickly, where I got this data from, it classifies Mohamed Salah as a midfielder. Same with Bryan Mbeumo, so, and like even Cunha there. So disregard it. It's something that's sort of out of my control in a way, but basically this data is going to be relevant when we talk about the forwards. We may even talk about the mids and forwards a little bit together here. So obviously Salah, far and away the best in terms of the goals that he scored, 29. Mbeumo there, 20. Playing at Brentford, now at Manchester United, even with Cunha, 15 for Wolves, now at Manchester United. What will that dynamic look like between Fernandes, Mbeumo, and Cunha? That's going to be really interesting to see there. But then you've got Palmer, solid as a rock with 15 goals. But then the midfielders draw right away. No one else has scored more than 10 goals. So looking at that list, mate, is there any sort of players that you can sort of project to go up and score potentially 10 goals in the upcoming season?
Look, I think I'm going to start from the bottom up. I think Foden is probably one who we can expect to see a bit of an improved output from. Only played 28 games. If he gets a full season, I could probably expect his numbers to be a bit higher. I'd probably say as well, who is it that I was looking at? Morgan Rogers for Aston Villa. Young player. I think even though he played 37 games, I think his output should naturally improve as he matures, as he grows as a player. And then perhaps one of Arsenal's boys, maybe Martinelli or Trossard. I don't know how they all sort of fit in the rotation. But if there's one that becomes, really nailed for 60 plus minutes a game, I think they should be a strong offensive side as well.
Yeah. And that's really interesting you bring all those players up, because those are probably the players that I'm thinking as well. Now, I'm really interested to see, like you were talking about Thomas Frank, Andros go in terms of offense. Everything was offense, playing, beating the high line, that sort of thing. But now Son Heung-min is probably going to leave. We've got James Maddison at 9. Can he push into that 10? Amad Diallo is a great young player for us. Kicked 8 goals last year. Could he go to another level? We saw spurts of what he can do, including the game that he played against Manchester City, which was the famous derby win there. Can he just become a little bit more consistent and become an asset that really gets us thinking week in, week out? So those are some players to consider. But here's where some extra data becomes more important when we talk about assists. So not only did Salah lead all midfielders in goals, he also led all midfielders in assists. But we can see that a lot of players had now in there. So Bukayo Saka only scored 6 goals in 25 appearances. But that's another player like Phil Foden that we would expect to see come back to his sort of best form. Had 10 assists last year. We can see the number even increase to sort of become into that elusive 10-goal, 10-assist club. Ross, is there any other players that sort of get your eye in terms of the assist numbers that we probably should be giving a little bit more consideration?
Look, I think it's interesting that Jacob Murphy, if you take Salah out as a forward, Jacob Murphy is actually the leading assist getter there for players, He's not exactly a spring chicken, He's 30 years old, but Newcastle, in theory, should have a solid offensive line. We know that they did perform really, really well at home. They scored 40 goals, as you mentioned before. But they lose Isak. I don't know if they're going to lose Gordon. I've heard that they might be looking at signing Sesko from RB Leipzig. I don't really know whether he can replicate that again. But if Newcastle are continuing to play that sort of offensive style, then I don't see why he wouldn't. Alanga and Gibbs-White are 2 sort of really good focal points. I know we're going to talk about Chris Wood, but he's a striker whose conversion was really, really strong. And having midfielders that play with such a striker like that, can usually make them a decent selection. Like, if they were passing to, for example, Darwin Núñez, who might not be so efficient, their assist numbers might not be so great. But Chris Wood, generally quite a good scorer, probably putting away a lot of the chances he was giving from Alanga and Gibbs-White.
So what you're telling me, Ross, then, is if Salah had 18 assists passing the ball to Darwin Núñez, he's going to have 25 assists when he passes the ball to Alexander Isak.
Well, that's possible, but we do need to sign him first. I think Newcastle are a bit cross with us, to say the least.
Look, the flow-on effect of possibly Isak leaving is Gordon playing up front. And that's a play that we would be really interested in that regard as well. Another player that's sort of drawing my eye there that I'm really surprised by, Jared Bowen. So 34 appearances, 0 goals, but 8 assists. If I'm not mistaken, Jared Bowen was a superstar in terms of the goals over the last couple of years, correct?
Yeah, I don't think that's right. I don't think he scored 0 goals.
Well,
100% he's scored more than 0.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Maybe it's just a bug in the data there.
Yeah.
He scored 10 goals. Okay, maybe it's just that's probably it. Because I'm like, I don't think he scored 0 goals either. But
Yeah,
moving on
he's
from
also
that,
a forward as
what
well.
about Jared Bowen? Talk to me about Jared Bowen.
He's a forward as well.
He's
So
a forward.
I think that might perhaps nullify him a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, with so many other options, you've got to pick Salah, you've got to pick Haaland, you've got to pick perhaps Isak. You know, it's going to make it tricky for us to fit Bowen in. But no, his scoring numbers and assist numbers are pretty strong. And at West Ham, there's not too much sort of going on. Kudus has left as well, which probably only leaves more opportunity for him to continue on his merry way, scoring and assisting.
Yeah, no, love that. And we can have a look at Martin Odegaard. So Martin Odegaard is one of those sort of holding midfielders that you talked a little bit about before, Roscoe. I guess there's a lot of sort of confusion as to who's on penalties at Arsenal. Could be Odegaard, could be Saka, could be Gyökeres when he comes in. It'll be really interesting to see what sort of happens then. I guess we need a little bit more data there before we sort of consider Odegaard, Rice as really formidable midfield options moving forward. Let's look quickly at the successful pass percentage. I just want to bring this up because obviously you get +2 points for those key passes. And so with a higher successful pass percentage, you're more likely to be able to carry that out. So Odegaard at 93%, Palm at 92%, Mohamed Salah at 90%, Mohamed Kudus at 90%. And then you just have Matheus Cunha at 89%. So some really popular names in there, but also some names that you may not have thought about before. But really, the successful passes isn't too much. The importance more so where those passes are. Do they lead to goals? Do they lead to assists? That sort of thing. Anything you want to add?
Nah, look, I wouldn't be relying on Will Hughes going off his successful passes. You know, it's a good metric to consider, but you know, not the be all and end all. I don't think.
But this is. And so ground balls won. So I guess the sort of data that we're looking at here is in terms of interceptions. So that's +1. You can also have sort of successful tackles is +1. And so Bruno Fernandes, and this is where, along with his penalties, along with him being one of the linchpins in Manchester United's attack, that he's a really strong ground duels winner. And this is where we can also see Kudus, we can see Salah. So some really high-end players in terms of the midfielders / forwards in the case of Mohamed Salah. We can see Anthony Gordon there with 160, Morgan Gibbs-White, another 160, and Bruno Guimaraes for Newcastle at 144. Played every game as well, which isn't too important, but still is quite a good sign as well. Is there any other sort of names that sort of get your eye in terms of ground duels? One, it's interesting to see no Declan Rice in here.
Yeah. No, I would have thought he would have been a bit higher there, but obviously maybe Marino probably has taken that role a little bit more for Arsenal. Sort of remains to be seen how they line up. You know, I think with Marino, and then they have Rice, and then they have Zubimendi, but they can't play them all. So
you would think that Rice is locked in though, so maybe he's the one you just play in week in, week out.
Yeah.
On the flip side, we've got the fouls committed. So Moses Caicedo is up there with 70. One of Chelsea's linchpins. Alexis McAllister, 62 for your mob. Morgan Rogers at 50. So that's one of those plays where if he's going to really elevate to the next level this year, you'd like to see that foul number a little bit down, just so he doesn't lose too many points in the back end. But is there any other players sort of, mate, that sort of draw your eye?
No, look, it's only -1 for a foul committed. So 73 across the season is a little bit, but not too much. I think these guys are actually sort of your plucky midfielders. You know, I look at Caicedo, I look at Lukic, I look at Guimaraes, Will Hughes, Joel Linton, Idrissa Gueye. Yeah. These are just your big, I don't know how you would call them. Like, they're just like hard men in your midfield. These guys are like the enforcers. That's how I'd probably put it respectfully. These guys are known for getting fouls, yellow cards, that sort of thing, which not necessarily the best for GDS, but they sort of possibly help other players flounder a little bit as well.
And you're talking about Anton Semenyo. So he led midfielders in fouls, but he also led midfielders in interceptions. So it's a little bit of give or take in that regard. And similarly, Morgan Rogers is also on this list down there with 36. So these players are sort of high risk, high reward in a way. Mohamed Kudus, good to see that he's on 49. So now at Tottenham, it's really interesting to see what his role will look like for sure. A play that a lot of attention's been going to in terms of sort of talking with other people from a fantasy perspective is Dango Uatara. I'm not sure if I said
Mhm.
that correctly. Do you want to give a little bit of intel about him as sort of a prospect?
Yeah, so Dango was one that I actually had in my fantasy Premier League a little bit towards the back end of the season. I know Evan Nielsen, Bournemouth striker, ended up injured, and they ended up with Semenyo, Kluivert, and Otara as their sort of attacking options. He actually started up front in a few games, even though he's probably more of a midfield type, and that was really beneficial to him, scoring, assisting, that sort of thing. But he also had that sort of tracking back to do, is that's what he's sort of in the side to do, whereas he was just covering as a striker. So I think it remains to be seen with Evan Nielsen back whether he'll have a nailed spot. As I'd say, Semenyo, Kluivert, and Evan Nielsen probably come before him in the pecking order, plus whoever else they might have signed. So I think he's one that we could watch for, but I'm not too sure about his job security at the moment.
No, very fair, mate. Well, here it is, the yellow and the red cards. So a couple of names, Moses Caicedo there with 11, Joel Linton at 10, Morgan Rogers at 10, so not very handy. But when we look over the red cards, I remember both of Bruno's red cards very fondly. The reason why he only had 36 appearances, he didn't have many yellow cards, but he did have I think it was 2 straight reds, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. So yeah, let's hope that Bruno can come off the aggression a little bit this year. But again, I guess it's one of those things, because you're not locked into a player going forward. You don't cop the game ban for the next week, so you only really cop it in that specific week. Morgan Rogers, we talked about. Not too many other really big names. Maybe Morgan Gibbs-White with 9 yellows and a red card, but nothing else that really draws our attention, is there?
Nah, I don't think so. And these guys have only had 1 red card for the season. Same with the own goals as well. 1 red card is -8. 1 own goal is, what is that? I think it's -5. So
-5
these are
across all
fairly
positions.
low occurrence statistics that happen in the game.
And you can't predict it. Like,
No,
you really can't predict an own goal. Like, it just happens, and you can't really beat yourself up over it because it's not your fault in that regard.
exactly right. If I'm a Liverpool supporter
Yeah.
and we had like a Suarez in the World Cup in 2010, we need to win the title, and
Yeah.
Mohamed Salah ends up on the goal line and he sticks his hand up and gets sent off a handball, but they missed a penalty.
Red
It's
card,
bad for
own
Gangway squad.
goal. Yeah.
You've won the league, so
Yeah.
sometimes red cards are what's needed.
That's it, mate. That's it.
Same with these own goals, just unlucky.
Let's look at penalty goals then. So we're not looking at penalties drawn here, but we're looking at penalty goals, and there's a couple of reasons why we bring this up, mate. So off Mohamed Salah's 29 goals last year, 9 of them were penalties, which is a pretty sizable number. But as a sort of owner, you don't really care. Like, I'm here to tell you, we don't care how you get the goals, as long as you get the goals. Brian Mbeumo, now this is an interesting one that I want to talk to you about. So Mbeumo's here. Cunha isn't on this list, but was also Wolves' penalty taker. We can see that Bruno Fernandes had 3 penalty kicks last year, penalty goals. Now, what are we sort of thinking from that regard, that we got 3 penalty takes in one team, but I'm pretty sure that Fernandes will take Manchester United's penalties? Does that sort of bring Mbeumo and Cunha back into the pack as options?
Yeah, look, I think having that point of difference taken away from them is something that is not ideal. But I wouldn't be surprised at Manchester United. I'm going to drop a little snipe here. The team that they are, if these guys end up fighting for the penalties, whoever wins it might be trying to steal the ball, or that sort of thing. Like, that just seems like the kind of guy that Bruno would be, especially with 2, players like Mbeumo and Cunha. I think Cunha, being his national team teammate, could be a little bit volatile with Bruno as well. But no, you definitely want to try and get penalty takers where you can. It's the same with Pedro and Palmer. Palmer being Chelsea's 2024 taker, Pedro coming into Chelsea now. So watch to see who
possibly,
takes the
knock on wood, Isaac and Salah.
Yeah.
Can someone take the penalties away from Salah? And what does that sort of mean as an asset? So really, really interesting stuff all around there. And then the lowlights, penalties missed. So Marco Asensio, I think he's missed all of his penalties. That's what that means. So he had 2 and he missed 2. Eze had 2, missed 1. Haaland had 4, missed 1. Palmer had 5, missed 1, and Mbuma had 6 and he missed 1. So we can see some certain stats there. Even Evan Nielsen had 1, missed 1. They're very low sample size because of how frequently or infrequently they occur, but really interesting stuff to think about, especially if someone's in a little bit of a rut. That's something to think about. Here's Game Day Society's midfield tier ranks, and just having a look at it, some of the names we've talked about, I think Phil Foden as a superstar is something that we're sort of forecasting will happen as opposed to going off of last year's data, because last year wasn't overly great, but we can really see him coming into that superstar level this year. In terms of other sort of tiers, mate, is there anyone that stands out to you or you think that may not be in sort of where you would have them?
No, look, I think the top tier, again, is pretty spot on. And Burmo could drop back a little bit, obviously, if he's not the penalty taker. There's a few that could come up, and I don't think we really mentioned it before, talking about the penalties. Mitoma at Brighton,
yes,
with Pedro going, could find a more attacking role, could find himself on penalties as well. Same goes for Mikel Damsgaard over at Brentford, with Burmo being gone.
And possibly
take penalties. Yeah, does he take penalties? But then that comes with the risk of they've lost Mbeumo and they've lost Visser. Are they actually going to be any good? Like that's the 2 main talisman up front. Bruno Guimaraes, Elliot Anderson from Newcastle, both. Elliot and Anderson's from Forest. Both pretty solid midfield options there. Sort of your reliable holding midfielders. And then if we have a look through the rest of the list, Rodri's definitely one to watch that I think is intriguing. The Ballon d'Or winner from a couple of years ago missed pretty much all of last season injured. It remains to be seen how he comes in and plays, but we know what he's capable of when he's fit. And then I'm going to just throw one out here from the Rising Stars list. I think Ethan Nwaneri from Arsenal could be one to watch. I know they've signed Gyökeres, and maybe that puts him a bit behind in the pecking order with him, Saka, Gabriel Jesus, but he's got a lot of talent, and I think he's one that, if he gets given the chance, could excel really well in the games. But I wouldn't be relying on him getting consistent minutes.
Now, there's one player that we haven't mentioned. I'm surprised you haven't mentioned him. Your big signing, Florian Wirtz. Tell me where, if he, again, like Frimpong, give me a little bit of gossip about him and where you would slot him in, or like you project him to be amongst the superstars, ballers, uniques.
Well, look, I think with him, I think it's a bit different to Frimpong. I think he should start in every game that he plays. He might get managed a little bit, sort of adjusting to the tempo of the Premier League. But I think coming into the team that's won the league and playing in a midfield that's got McAllister, Szoboszlai, these kind of guys, Salah, and if they sign Isak, like it should be a no-brainer to put him in the superstars tier. If he's feeding Salah, if he's feeding Isak, we know the talent that he has. Like it seems simple, but at the same time, things aren't always simple.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to see where he sort of fits into this Liverpool lineup. In fact, I'm so keen to see how, like, you really have Kerkez, Frimpong, Isak, Wirtz. That's a lot of turnover to a championship winning team. So, like, where does this all sort of fitting into the starting 11? Really interested to see there. All right, we're almost there now. Now talk about the forwards. Now, we're not going to talk too much about the forward stats because if you haven't noticed, they're the exact same as the midfielder stats. What you might see, though, is the forwards are more likely to get those attacking sort of points in terms of goals scored and assists. So there's no real sort of benefit in owning a forward more than a midfielder. But what there might be the benefit of having is the fact that they're probably less, or it's actually debatable in terms of less desirable forward assets compared to midfield assets. What would you say straight off the bat without like seeing too much, Ross? Would you say there's more desirable forward or more desirable midfield assets?
I think those midfielders that we mentioned, the top liners, your Palmers, your Fernandes, are probably more desirable assets to have and play, as they're essentially replicating what a forward would do, but you take them in a midfield slot. It's similar in AFL. You know, you get your forwards who are playing halfback and taking lots of kick-ins, racking up lots of stats. You know, you get these guys who are playing midfield, but they're actually forwards. So those guys are good to have as well. I think you want to avoid having big, clunky strikers. I think sort of wingers and sort of nippy strikers can sort of go a little bit better than, say, target man. I know Haaland and Isak are probably two players, Chris Wood as well, who would be considered sort of target men. But then, you got a lot of teams in the league that have strikers that are just a bit clunky, and we don't really want to be taking them. But I'm sure a lot of you guys that are watching know there's a lot of big names in the forward line, and most weeks we're probably going to have a real scramble to fit them all in, and there's going to be a squeeze with someone missing out.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Well, let's talk about some of those forwards. So if you guys want to just jog your memories very quickly, in terms of the midfielders that we were having a look at before. Oh, sorry. I just want to get back to this slide very quickly. Cole Palmer at 16.1, Fernandez 14.6, Eze at 13. So those are the only three sort of forwards that had an average above 11.5. When we look at, sorry, let me just go forward very quickly.
There's a lot of them.
When we have a look at the forwards, there are a lot of forwards that went over 11.5. So Salah, Saka, Cunha, Mbeumo, Haaland, Isak, Bowen, and Ahmad all went above 11.5 on average. And so we're going to break down what sort of made them so special in a way. But I think looking straight off the bat there, Cunha and Mbeumo at 3 and 4, I don't know how it's going to look like at Manchester. We've talked about it a couple of times. Then Isak at 13.35, if he does join Liverpool, how will it look? Yeah. And so theoretically, you've got 3 Manchester United forwards that have an average above 11.5 plus Bruno. So that's 4 right there. So how will it look? I don't think we're going to be scoring 5 goals every week to be bolstering all 4 of them up at the same time, but it'll be interesting to see there. Haaland at 13.5. Now, would you say that potentially his season last year was a little below his lofty standards of the years before that in the Premier League?
Look, I don't know. I think
Very
I'd have to
lofty
look at the
standards.
numbers. I'd have to look at the numbers more specifically. I believe he did miss a few games through injury, and he still got within 10 goals of Salah,
22
who played
goals,
pretty much the full season. Yeah, so Salah got 29, so he was within 7, and he missed a few games. So I think with City continuing to bolster up, they've lost De Bruyne, which could be something which could hurt him a little bit. But also, it's Manchester City. They didn't win the league. They could just bounce back and go really strongly, and he scores a lot. He does love to pile on the goals against lower table teams. So having a gold or a platinum and above Haaland in other formats like, Challenger Champion, definitely a very valuable card to own.
Yeah. Awesome, mate. Well, let's talk about some of these stats then. So amongst the forwards now, again, some of those players like Salah and Saka, Jared Bowen were in the previous set with the midfielders. Amongst those that were just stated as a forward, we have Alexander Isak at 23 goals last year, Haaland at 22. Chris Wood was sort of a revelation last year for Forest, 20 goals. Yohan Wissa at 19. So if Brentford do end up losing Mbeumo and Wissa in the one transfer period, someone is going to have to step up for them. Otherwise, they may be pushing relegation in terms of losing 2 of your star attackers just like that. See Mateta with 14 goals. And then you sort of get a mixed bag amongst some of the Chelsea forwards. You have 3 Brighton forwards that had 10 goals each. And again, with Pedro to Chelsea, is a time for Kairo Mitoma to really take that next step in his progression and become that 15-goal scorer per season. So that's something that I think he's a card that we may be looking at sort of as a player that might be undervalued right now, but we may be looking at the season's end as one of the best assets in the game. Yeah. Is there anything else that you sort of stands out? Ollie Watkins, again, with 16 goals, just gets the job down most weeks.
Yeah. Look, we've obviously got no more Vardy. Who else? Wissa might be at Newcastle. Isak might be at Liverpool. There's a lot of switching around that's going to be happening. I think Solanke's won only 27 games for 9 goals. If he puts a season together, I can definitely see him improving on that.
Yeah. And I'd love to say that Rasmus Højlund will be in this mix. Hopefully he gets some of those shots on goal into goals next year. Let's look at the assists. So Ollie Watkins, 16 goals along with 8 assists there. So really doing it both with the goals and the assists. And that makes him one of the best sort of forwards in the game. We can see that Cody Gakpo now, he's such a good player, but I don't think there's a definitive role in the side for him, is there?
No, look, I think it's going to be tricky for Gakpo. He's going to be rotated a lot. If we sign Isak, we're
Yeah.
probably going to have Isak, Salah, and then Verts in the midfield. Probably on the left might be Ekatike, the new signing. I don't really
Yeah.
know much about him, to be honest, but apparently he's very big, but he's very quick. That's all I know.
Yeah.
So Gakpo, even though he scored 10 goals and 4 assists, he actually came off the bench a lot for his last season. I can see
Yeah.
that happening again.
Yeah. And then when we look through the board, Kai Havertz, an interesting one. Where does he go? So in terms of Martinelli, Havertz, Saka, and then Gyökeres, 4 doesn't fit into 3. Like Trossard in that mix as well. So there's probably going to be some tough calls there. You would probably think that Saka is locked in. Gyökeres maybe eased into the season. I don't think Havertz can really replicate this form unless he gets a new definitive role. We'll just have to wait and see how the season looks when Arsenal pops up. And then the pass completion percentage. I'm really happy to see Evan Nielsen there as the Bournemouth striker. You're mentioning that he missed a couple of games with injury, Roscoe.
Yeah.
93%. Again, this is just mainly for the key pass. We can see that there's clearly a discrepancy between the midfielders and the forwards in terms of their pass completed. Typically due to pass percentage completed, typically due to being higher up the ground and being played in more dangerous positions where there may be a bit more defensive attention there.
Yeah.
And then the yellow and red cards. Liam Delap from the relegated Ipswich Town, 12 yellow cards.
Well,
Oh,
he's up to Chelsea now. So,
he's up to Chelsea. Very,
yeah,
very true.
he's moved.
And your boy, Darwin Nunez at 8.
Yeah.
A bit of a hothead.
Yeah.
Nicholas Jackson, 7 yellow cards and a red card. Again, having played FPL and seen Nunez and Jackson get all the chances and not successfully carry out any of them is very annoying. But hopefully that they can provide a lot of sort of offensive firepower for their respective teams.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't know what Jackson's opportunity will look like. I don't know what Nunes' opportunity will look like. I think both clubs will probably be looking to sell those players to fund other moves, but it just remains to be seen whether they actually get it done.
Exactly. Well, mate, we're here to the final tier list then. So Game Day Society's forward tier rankings: superstar, ballers, uniques, rising stars, and the newbies. Amongst the superstars, we've got Isaac, Saka, Haaland, Bowen, Cunha, Salah, and Marmoush was a name that we didn't mention throughout the slides, but I think he was signed in the the winter transfer period.
Yeah, January.
Yeah. And so it should be a solid option. Where does he fit with Foden and Grealish and even it's Doku? Like, where does it all fit for Manchester City is one to be seen. But what do you think in terms of this sort of tier list, mate?
Yeah, look, the superstars are going to be the superstars. It's a matter of picking out the ones who might improve if we even need to. You know, there's a lot of players who can bob up on their day and put in good performances. I'm looking at Chris Wood, I'm looking at Solanke, I'm looking at Welbeck and Mitoma for Brighton with no Pedro. You know, I'm looking at Havertz at Arsenal, I'm looking at Mateta at Crystal Palace. And then we've obviously got Victor Gyökeres coming in at Arsenal, another one to watch, Hugo Ekitike at Liverpool. Do we look at any of the relegation team sort of assets, like the ones that have come up? Are we looking at Joel Pirot sort of playing that advanced forward role? It's not really sure. You know, there's a lot of options in the forward line. And I think it could be a matter of trying to pick the best, but also trying to pick the best matchups, which does make it a bit difficult.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see my boy Rasmus Højlund couldn't even get a mention anywhere. So he is hopefully going to prove everyone wrong and end up as at least a unique come the season's end. Mate, we have talked for an hour and 14 minutes about GDS football. We are so hyped. Can't wait to sort of crack into the season as it gets going. Hopefully this video was sort of informational for all of you guys in terms of the stats. We both love our stats, so this was pretty fun for us to make. Before we finish, Ross, I want your predictions. I'm going to give mine as well. Who's going to be the top averaging goalkeeper, defender, midfielder, and forward come season's end?
All right. I'm going to go with my goalkeeper. I'm going to go with Sells. I think Nottingham Forest
I'm going to go with
should be steady again. I'm going to go with Sells. For my defender, I think I'm going to risk it for the biscuit. I'm going to go with Tarkowski.
Tarkovsky.
I'm
All
sort of
right.
liking his defensive mindedness. I think Everton could be an improved side this year. Midfielder, I'll probably go with Palmer. I think Palmer's a good bet to be up there again. And in the forwards, I think I'll take Haaland.
Look, I can't disagree with you on the midfielders and the forward. I think Palmer and Haaland are very, very solid and very strong. I'm going to go a bit different with the goalkeeper. As I mentioned, Jordan Pickford just gets the job done week in, week out. We'll get the saves points. And with a strong sort of midfield, should get out of defense, so should get some clean sheet points there as well. In terms of the midfielders, though, in terms of the defenders, though, I might sort of go a little bit into what you were mentioning before and say, yes, he may be suspected to some sort of Pep Guardiola roulette, but when Ryan Atneri is playing, I reckon he's going to be the highest averaging defender across the season. We weren't saying the highest scoring, we're getting the highest averaging because that's all we care about at GDS.
Yeah. The highest averaging defender will probably be some bloke from Leeds that comes on against Sunderland, scores, gets a clean sheet, and that's it. He doesn't play again for the rest of the season.
Look, very
I do like your pick. The false three, he's a good player, very dangerous offensively. And yeah, hopefully he gets nailed on very early.
No, that's it, mate. Well, it was a pleasure talking with you, mate. Hopefully the viewers
100%.
have enjoyed this video. We're going to put it out. This is basically all the stats that you need to make the informed decisions ahead of game week 1. Obviously, some of the new transfers, we can't really get the data on them because they haven't played in the league before. But hopefully this was really informative for you guys. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, comment who you think will be the top sort of averaging players across each of the lines and what sort of stats really drew your attention. Again, just a disclaimer, if there's any data that was incorrect, sorry about that. It was just putting it all together. There may have been 1 or 2 discrepancies, but for the most part, the data is correct. So hopefully this can really underpin that. Ross, is there anything that you want to leave on with?
Yeah, look, obviously we've got a couple of weeks till the start of the season, so keep your eyes peeled. We're going to try and run through a preview of some of the teams and the team lineups, whether that comes individually grouped or one big sort of video, sort of trying to deep dive into who plays. But ultimately, these stats are excellent, but a lot of it actually comes down to when the season starts and we get to see what happens. Then we can sort of form judgments on players' roles and who's taking this and who's doing that. Another thing we're going to try and cover as well is fixtures. So we love our DVP for the Aussie rules. We're going to try and cover some fixturing to target as well over the first couple of weeks.
And one other thing, if you're a GDS AFL fan, Ross and I, we're going to have a special video. That's not just the normal round review preview. We're going to go through and sort of highlight some players that you may want to be investing in as players going into next year. So players that we believe will break out next year and we'll get on early ahead of the curve there. But look, please let us know how you find this video. Any feedback is appreciated. And we'll see you guys next. We'll see you guys again for the next GDS or video, which drops on the Supercoach Sword Play channel. Cheers, guys.
See ya.